One observation that you can make about America is that everything is very commercialized. There are themed decorations, sales, and snacks for just about every holiday and event out there. But whether that's a bad thing or not tends to depend on how you feel about holidays overall, if you like to celebrate them, and especially your age. Because once you're an adult, even some of the major holidays start to feel kind of tired and worn out. But when you're a kid, some of the best celebrations were usually held right there in the classroom. And as far as elementary school holiday parties went, a general rule was the more commercialized, the better. I grew up in America in the 2000s, so I really got the full experience of themed classroom parties. That's not to say that any of these holidays or traditions are exclusively American, or only took place in the 2000s, but I don't have much reference for what international primary schools are like, so I'm mostly relying on my own ancient, yeehaw American experiences in this case. For example, during Valentine's Day for children, you've got shiny foil cards you bought from CVS, shoe boxes covered in stickers, and everything pink, red, and heart-shaped. Valentine's Day at its core is one of the candy holidays, which made it one of the best school celebrations because there was all the candy of the grown-up Valentines, but with usually 0% of the romance. But to still keep the festivities in line with the holiday spirit, getting to eat candy for an entire school day still came with a process. Every year at my elementary school, the whole class would be tasked with creating and decorating their own Valentine's card mailbox, which could be anything from a paper bag to a shoebox with a hole cut in the top, and covered with as much construction paper, glitter, and heart-shaped stickers as it could possibly fit. Then came the cards. Choosing exactly the right branded Valentine's cards was a very important ordeal. These were going to be passed out to everyone in class with your name on them. They had to truly represent you. Only the most popular franchises, coolest characters, or cutest designs were acceptable. Most children's Valentine's cards are pretty basic, just a little foldable piece of cardstock with a character and phrase printed on them that usually had a spot where you'd attach a piece of candy. Some cards were printed with this shiny foil, like they were Pokemon cards or something, which also made them feel pretty important and official compared to boring adult mail. My favorite pack that I remember using for a few years in a row was a Hello Kitty themed set that were all pink and polka dotted, and it felt so grown up and highbrow to fill the little envelopes it had with candy and sealing them all with a sticker like they were actual mail or something. In my experience, it was customary to save your favorite designs in each pack for your friends, leaving the most generic phrases like "you're cool" or "Happy Valentine's Day" for the kids you didn't really know but were obligated to still give something to. Or, in simpler terms, if I had a pack of Jonas Brothers Valentines, the Nick cards would go to my friends, the Joe cards would go to my best friends, and everyone else whose name I barely remembered got stuck with Kevin. If you are really feeling emboldened by the Valentine's spirit, you might even drop a card with a more love-themed phrase in your crush's mailbox to drop a hint that you wanted to hold hands at recess later. Though, I don't think most people really bothered to read the Valentines they received before just ripping the candy off of them and tossing out the card. So, tough luck for all the hopeless romantic 8-year-olds out there who declared their love with what they thought was the perfect Yu-Gi-Oh! Valentine's card that probably just ended up in the trash. And no elementary holiday event would be complete without the crafts, which for Valentine's Day usually involved pretty much anything pink and red or heart-shaped. These heart guys with the crinkle-cut legs are a pretty standard elementary school design because they're simple and effective. Though, looking at these things now, they're reminding me a little too much of Ricardio from Adventure Time, which I don't like. Snacks could double as a treat and a craft, like decorating a cupcake or cookie with themed toppings, and there was probably also some kind of Valentine's Day card or picture frame that I made to bring home to my parents, another staple elementary craft that was generic enough to fit any and every holiday. Another holiday that's celebrated pretty differently between kids and adults is St. Patrick's Day, where most adults just use the day as an excuse to go out drinking while wearing green. In elementary schools, everyone is drinking punch and wearing green, so I guess it's actually not that different. Most of the people who celebrate in America, at least, don't have much context for what the holiday is about or its history. They just know it as the green holiday. And I, an American brought up in the public school system attending these school parties, grew up thinking no different. Are leprechauns offensive? Who actually is St. Patrick? I don't really know, and before I was old enough to realize I could just Google the answer, I probably thought St. Patrick was a leprechaun, because in addition to drinking green-colored punch and eating shamrock-sprinkled cookies, I always knew St. Patrick's Day as not just the green holiday, but also the leprechaun holiday. For a few years when I was in a class that was young enough to believe it, I had teachers that would wait until all the kids left the classroom and then knock stuff over, throw things around, and sprinkle gold coins around the room so that it looks like a leprechaun had ransacked the place while we were gone. I'm not sure if that necessarily fits the leprechaun lore of what they usually get up to, but the room would look like someone had been listening to Break Stuff by Limp Bizkit and got a little carried away. Then we'd all freak out about some magical little man breaking into our classroom, which honestly should have scared us more than it did, but then we just carried on with our day. Some classes also like to make and set up leprechaun traps in hopes of catching him before he could do any damage, though unfortunately that never quite worked out. In the rare case that you caught a leprechaun, or found the end of a rainbow and won a pot of gold as a reward, this sparked the question of what you would do with a pot of gold, which also served as a decent writing prompt to keep things at least slightly educational, instead of just eating a bunch of green snacks. I can't really remember what I wrote as my answer now, though it was likely something along the lines of buy tickets to a Jonas Brothers concert and every Webkinz I could ever want, which is actually not that different from what my answer would be nowadays. Anything else that vaguely fit the theme of green and Irish were fair game for crafts, like painting rainbows and pots of gold, or the return of the crinkle-cut character from before, but this time in the shape of a shamrock. It was also usually pretty easy to make your own leprechaun craft too, with the only real requirements being a green hat and an orange beard. Or you could turn yourself into a leprechaun, which when made and worn by 6-year-olds looks funny every time. Gold coins and Lucky Charms were other motifs that were easy to adapt to different activities, which could be as educational as counting and charting the different Lucky Charms marshmallows, or as non-educational as just eating chocolate gold coins, because why would you want to bother doing any learning when you could just eat a bunch of snacks? Sticking with the theme of every holiday having a mascot, especially when it comes to holiday parties for kids, in Easter's case, the magical Limp Bizkit leprechaun is replaced by the rabbit. The spring chicken, or whatever the Easter chicks are supposed to be, are also close runners-up, leaving Easter to be all about carrots and eggs, which kinda sounds really lame when you don't factor in the candy. Depending on your school, and I guess the school's budget, you might even get a special visit from the Easter Bunny himself, though I'm in the camp of believing that there's almost no version of an Easter Bunny mascot costume that doesn't look horrific, so even though my school probably couldn't afford to hire one because we barely had the budget for paper some years, I'm glad that it didn't come to this. If you didn't end up participating in a standard Easter egg hunt during school, which of course brought on tons of candy, then you probably decorated an egg in as many different and creative ways as possible that didn't have kids handling actual eggs, which I'm sure was for the best. From coloring pages to construction paper, it was all just eggs, and if it wasn't eggs, then it was rabbits, so plenty of bunny-themed paper crafts were always a hit, especially anything involving the ever-versatile white paper plate. Mother's Day and Father's Day were an interesting holiday to celebrate at school because they mostly revolved around making crafts to take home for parents, basically a school assignment that reminds you to tell your parents that you love them, which I'm sure doesn't sully the gesture at all, but it's still a funny concept. Although picture frames and various household tchotchkes tend to be an elementary school craft staple no matter the holiday, Mother's and Father's Day are when these gifts really shine the most. Mother's Day tended to be themed around flowers and other spring-y things, since it's in May, and Father's Day, if your school had you celebrate it early, would be more centered on summer and sports stuff, because that's obviously what dads usually like. As someone who's only a parent to 2 dumb dogs and a grumpy old cat, I can't say for sure if these really are decent gifts or not. I do think they're cute, and now that I think about it, I would cherish some pile of popsicle sticks and glitter glue if any of my pets could somehow grow the thumbs and brain to make one. So I guess I see the appeal. My mom still has some of my old Mother's Day crafts from over the years, so I guess that means she was moved enough to keep them after all this time. But I know that kids also tend to come home with a lot of different art projects over the years while they're in school. So parents, please feel free to let me know in the comments if these crafts are fun or if they're just annoying. The last of the main 3 candy holidays, and maybe the most major one of all, is none other than Halloween. And Halloween at school was often just as exciting as actual trick-or-treating. Depending on your school rules, you might not have been able to wear your costume into class, but if you were allowed, this was basically the Halloween pre-show, the party before the main event where you could show off your costumes in the daylight and make sure everyone saw how cool you looked. If choosing the right Valentine's cards was a big deal, then wearing the right costume was an even bigger deal. Rocking up as a witch or bootleg Hannah Montana was a very pivotal moment for your reputation at school. Of course, costumes were usually required to be school appropriate, practical enough to wear for the full day, and there was always the chance that if the vibes were off, you might end up being the only person to wear a costume at all, which kind of had the opposite effect on your self-esteem. But the younger the class, the more chance all the other kids would also come dressed as Spider-Mans and Harry Potter characters too. Or, I guess in today's case, Mr. Beasts and Skibbity Toilets. Whether you wore a costume or not, your class might have a setup similar to the Valentine's Day card exchange, with decorated bags or any other candy receptacle of choice all on the desks. This time though, you could drop off just the candy without any need for those pesky Valentine's cards that no one usually read anyway. Even though there was usually plenty of candy to go around, that didn't mean that there was any shortage of other Halloween-themed snacks. The snack table wasn't all just regular cookies and juice boxes, but you'd get a good amount of assembled snacks. Meanwhile, the crafts were just as creative, since they could be about anything Halloween-y enough to fit the theme. Just about anything that could be made out of a paper plate or turned into yet another crinkle-cut character. After classroom trick-or-treating, my class usually settled in to watch a Halloween movie to finish off the day, which of course was also school appropriate, and since it was made for kids, probably wasn't gonna be all that scary. Like Monster House Up! Or maybe just a Disney Channel original? Or just something else that hopefully wouldn't traumatize a bunch of elementary schoolers. My school was relatively old and in a small town, so most of the movies we watched were from a backlog of tapes that hadn't been updated since the 90s. I definitely saw the original Casper movie more than a few times in class for Halloween. And after all of that, you still got to go home for the real celebration, actual trick-or-treating, which you'd hopefully still have the energy for after all of the festivities were over. It sounds kind of exhausting now, especially for an elementary schooler. I actually don't think my schedule has been that packed with back-to-back events since elementary school, but that might just be me. Still, it was completely worth it, and of course, way better than any regular day of school might have been. The end of the year in America is great not just for the changing leaves and cooler weather, but for the 3 months of back-to-back holidays. And after Halloween comes the second installment of late-year holidays, Thanksgiving. As far as snacks went, while there was typically the usual spread of various themed cookies and snack cakes, Thanksgiving at my school also changed what kind of food you'd find in the cafeteria. Fall break tended to let school out a day or two before the actual holiday, but you could still find turkey, mashed potatoes, green beans, and some other classic Thanksgiving fixins at lunch before the break. Compared to all the various options for Halloween decorations, Thanksgiving decor was scaled back to a more simpler theme that revolved mostly around one thing. For anyone who might not know, eating turkey at Thanksgiving dinner is the main and kind of only point of the holiday, so it takes priority as the focal point, though falling leaves, pumpkins, and being thankful are close runners-up. Crafts might have you making a scarecrow, cutting out pumpkins, writing about what you're thankful for, or creating a turkey through many various and creative means, including a crinkle-cut version, and my personal favorite, the hand turkey. Since moving to Australia, I've started hosting Thanksgiving with my partner's Australian family, and every year I've made it an important tradition to have everyone honor the hand turkey, one of elementary school's finest crafts. So simple, yet striking, autumnal, yet timeless. It's a hand, but it's also a turkey. There are definitely other animals and creatures that can be made from hand tracings, but the turkey arguably works the best. And it's easy enough that even the most rowdy of kids should have a hard time making a mess of things. It'll still probably mostly look like a turkey, especially if you got extra creative and glued on some craft feathers, or dressed it in a fitting pilgrim hat. Oh, yeah, the pilgrims. The more relevant yet unfortunately problematic side of Thanksgiving. For all the holidays that are celebrated in school, this is one of the only ones I can remember that actually had more of an educational aspect to it, even if it was pretty minor. The history of Thanksgiving that's taught in school usually involves a boat, some pilgrims, Native Americans, and a big old feast where everyone had a good time and nothing terrible happened at all. The less child-friendly version of the story, unsurprisingly, isn't quite as nice and good-natured as they had us believe, but like a lot of American history, the happier, glossed-over version is what takes priority in school, leading to plenty of kids wearing various Native American and pilgrim crafts and costumes, and maybe even participating in a play that depicted the story. I'm definitely not against celebrating Thanksgiving or anything, but it's just interesting how watered down the elementary school interpretation of it is. To finish off the big three late-year holidays, there's the winter holiday season, which in America is usually headlined by Christmas. While Santa Claus is the main mascot of Christmas, there are still plenty of other holiday motifs to work with that keep all the school party activities creative. Decorations and snacks can be themed around snowmen, elves, Christmas trees, and ornaments. And speaking of ornaments, the Christmas crafts are also a beacon of creativity in showing that anything can be a Christmas tree ornament if you really want it to be. My mom still hangs a wide variety of handmade elementary school ornaments on the tree every year. Not all of them were masterpieces, like this coloring page that's just been decimated by crayon scribbles, but some of them were more creative, like this tracing of my shoe that turns even a second grader's foot into a symbol of holiday cheer. Or just the vague resemblance of a reindeer, whatever you want to call it. These baked fake cookie ornaments always were and still are some of my favorites. They're like real cookies, but not. For something that's made with just cinnamon and applesauce, they've lasted a surprisingly long time, even surviving the few times I've tried to take little bites out of them when I was younger, despite being told that they definitely were not normal cookies. They didn't taste good. One of my other favorite holiday crafts also involved cookies, which may be unsurprising given the whole trying to eat the ornaments thing. The standard milk cartons from lunch make a decent base for a small-scale gingerbread house, where you can put frosting and graham crackers on to build the walls and then decorate it. Now that I'm older, eating anything off of an old-school milk carton doesn't sound as appealing, even though I'm sure they must have cleaned them first, but I still think this is a cute little activity to do, and it involved a lot of sugar, so that's all that I needed. I'm pretty sure I remember being allowed to wear pajamas to school on the day of the Christmas party, which, when paired with hot chocolate and candy canes, made for the perfect cozy atmosphere to watch something like How the Grinch Stole Christmas or The Polar Express. While watching Christmas movies is pretty fun, what was usually my personal favorite part of the season was holiday shopping at the school gift store. For anyone that didn't experience this, the setup typically included a classroom that was closed off, filled with tables packed with all kinds of miscellaneous stuff, staffed with some willing PTA moms as cashiers, and turned into a makeshift gift shop where you could fulfill the task of buying Christmas gifts for your family. Sure, the inventory was usually pretty random and junky, and you were buying all the gifts for your family with the money that they gave you. And yeah, maybe I did cave in and always end up buying a couple of toys just for myself, which was not the point at all, but it was all in the name of the Christmas spirit, so none of that matters. For something that was essentially a glorified yard sale or souvenir trap, it was still really fun, even if the gifts were just cheap knickknacks that no one actually wanted, and I still wasted half the money on toys for myself that I hid from my parents. It's the thought that counts. Where most of the holidays celebrated in school are also recognized outside of school, there are a handful of special school holidays that are just entirely made up, seemingly just for the sake of having more parties and making even more crafts. The 100th day of school is a perfect example of a completely made-up holiday, but that didn't mean that it was any less fun. It's exactly what it sounds like, a day to celebrate the 100th day of school, and in my school at least, it was always treated as a pretty big deal. Now that I'm older, I can recognize that it's not as pointless and random as it might seem on the surface. Plenty of the decorations and activities are centered around how having 100 days of school means that you're 100 days smarter, which is a neat way to get kids excited about wanting to learn and feel accomplished for continuing through school each day. Because it's more of an abstract and, again, mostly made-up concept, 100th day parties could really vary per school, but the number 100 was always a central theme, unsurprisingly. Most activities were also more educational than some of the less school-related holidays, with writing prompts, graphing, and counting out 100 of any random object that made sense to be counted. I always associate the 100th day with counting out 100 Fruit Loops and wearing them around as a necklace that you could eat throughout the day, which maybe didn't make me much smarter, but it's a memory that's stuck with me, at least. On the other hand, this mixed media portrait of what you'd look like as a 100-year-old is a bit less educational, but still really fun. Again, I may not have benefited all that much from the 100th day since I was just in it for the snacks, as usual, but it's really wholesome to see how celebrating counting and learning in general can make for a fun party that makes kids excited for their accomplishments. Dr. Seuss Day, or Dr. Seuss's birthday, was a slightly less nuanced holiday that was also exactly what it sounds like, a day dedicated to celebrating Dr. Seuss. At my school, this one wasn't quite big enough to warrant a whole party, but there were definitely still decorations and activities, and of course, crafts. Dr. Seuss Day was usually spent reading, writing about, or crafting about all kinds of Dr. Seuss books. It felt like a pretty big deal, especially when, at my school, they even served green eggs and ham for lunch in the cafeteria. I don't really think there's any version of this food that looks not entirely disgusting, but the only other holiday that got special cafeteria food was Thanksgiving, so clearly Dr. Seuss Day was pretty important. And it makes sense. Regardless of what you could say about the guy himself, his books are often regarded as childhood classics and early reading staples, so I support making truffula trees out of cotton balls and eating dubious lunch foods, even if it uses up a whole school day, because it's books, so it's educational. Some holidays, though, were a little harder to make sense of and justify as being educational. And perhaps one of the most random of these less traditional school holidays is Johnny Appleseed Day. Also a day centered around and celebrating a guy, Johnny Appleseed wasn't a children's book author, but he still got an entire day dedicated to him in my elementary school every year. When I think about it now, I don't think I've ever heard the name Johnny Appleseed or anything about him since elementary school, and it's made me start to question what the whole purpose of this holiday even was. As far as the celebrations went, there were plenty of activities centered around apples, of course, and my school also always encouraged kids to dress up like Johnny Appleseed too, with flannels, overalls, an Appleseed bag, and a pot on your head, which he apparently wore for some reason. The story that I remember being taught, and how most children's books depict it too, is that Johnny Appleseed was just a regular guy with a pot on his head, who liked apples so much that he wandered around America planting apple trees wherever he went. He'd give out seeds, saplings, and apples to settlers along the way, teaching the people how to raise the saplings and plant trees of their own out of the kindness of his heart, so that everyone could have food and love apples too. In reality, Johnny Appleseed, or John Chapman, was a real guy, but he was much more a businessman than an apple-loving philanthropist. He traveled around as a Christian missionary and didn't really plant trees randomly so much as he planted nurseries where he'd sell his saplings or sell trees on shares. He eventually owned around 1,200 acres of land across 3 states. It's probably not untrue that he would sometimes give away apples and seeds and teach people how to grow their own food, but the books always seem to make it out as though he was the apple savior, that he planted every apple tree in America and kept everyone from starving with his apples, even though he was mostly just in it for the apple stonks and passing out Bibles. Sure, none of this makes him a bad person or anything, or not necessarily worth learning about, but it still feels like a very random story to not only make a point of teaching in school when, again, I haven't thought about Johnny Appleseed since I was like 10, but to also dedicate an entire day and celebration to him too. I guess the prime moral to take away is that planting trees and looking after the environment is important, and that helping people is the right thing to do, which I can get behind even if the method is a little weird. Aside from learning about Johnny Appleseed, however exaggerated the story was, eating apples in various forms, making paper plate apples, painting with apples, anything apple related was fair game. Aside from crafts like making construction paper versions of his iconic tin pot hat and, of course, crinkle-cut versions of Johnny Appleseed himself, the holiday very well could have just been called Apple Day instead and been about healthy eating or something, which seems like it would make just as much sense as Johnny Appleseed Day. When looking for references of all the crafts and snacks I remember having back when I was in elementary school, it made me really happy to see that a bunch of teachers are still carrying on lots of these same traditions with their students in the modern age. To be fair, making holiday characters out of paper plates probably also existed long before I was in school, so it would be surprising if it was phased out entirely. But the education system is always going through tons of changes as the years go on, so I'm just glad that crafting crinkle-cut guys and drinking juice boxes with your friends during a school celebration are still timeless traditions, and that the classroom holiday party continues to stay alive and well as an excuse to take a break from learning and have fun. Hi, welcome to JellyTV, where I shout out a video that I think deserves some love. I recommend watching The Hidden Lore of Toontown by The Braylon Show. I was always a pretty casual Toontown player when I was younger, so it surprised me that there was so much more to this game than just the main gameplay. Braylon makes sure to get into it all and covers everything from Easter eggs to forgotten features, and it was really fun to learn just that little bit more about a game that's still a beloved and nostalgic classic to this day. A huge thank you to Daniel E. from ABQ, Kevin Evans, Bunzo, Karis Desarun, Eliza, Findicano and Irise, Grayson and Sage, Hayden Campbell, Johan Ake, Lojma Animal, Lou, Luna Stephenson, Mark Kent, Nighttime Coral, Paper Sam, Pharmamags, Pixel Puppy, Shaples, Theodore Nicolawilius, Vivian Valencia, and the rest of my patrons for supporting me.